Welcome back, everyone. If you're here, you chose track one. If you're looking to join Talent and Rights, What You Don't Know Can Hurt You with Amy Cornelius King of Extreme Reach, head back to the agenda and click track two instead. But here on track one, we welcome Jamie Wilson, Director of Post-Production at Showtime Networks, to explore another aspect of how the creative and technology world come together for post-production. Jamie, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to the presentation. I'm here to discuss the streamlining the post-production workflow through asset management, also known as Revenge of the Nerds 5. It's a precious few who can actually have a genuine interest, dare I say, excitement in it. That said, I'll try to steer away from the virtues of a 147 megabits per second data stream versus a 220 megabits per second data stream and try to talk about process. I'd like to start with a little bit of background first. I want to make sure you all understand that the part of Showtime that I am now and have been related to for my entire career is the marketing department. So we are creating short form assets, not the shows. I've been at Showtime in this capacity, including the seeds of what I do today, for about 29 years. And during that time, I've seen file-based workflows begin and evolve into what they are today, the mainstream. In the beginning, though, people didn't really know how to manage this for two reasons. First, the managers themselves were straddling tape-based and file-based media management workflows. And secondly, there was some skepticism and a general lack of interest on the part of the end users, meaning the creatives, about where this was going. They just wanted to be able to make their stuff. Now we live in a time when we laugh about tape-based workflows, although sometimes we have to go back to digibetas of old series to create files, to which the kids generally respond with, "What's a digibeta?" If you don't know what a digibeta is, you can look it up on Google, and that joke will be funny. Anyway, there did come a tipping point when we at Showtime committed fully to a file-based system. Even though we were still acquiring assets from tape, Showtime has always been a forward-thinking company as far as post-production is concerned. And because of this, we saw the writing on the wall. And what I have to tell you today is the product of that experience over the last 14 years. Simplifying post-production workflows, in my experience, requires an adherence to three basic principles: simplicity, consistency, and keeping an eye on mind who your end user is. I will add that over these principles is a simple philosophy. What we do in the post-production process / environment is about setting it up so that the creative can happen seamlessly. It's really about the spot. And if you saw Jeremy Carson's session, you heard him talk about turning the idea into a story and getting people to care about what's in the video. It's not easy to do. When a producer or editor are in the zone and they get pulled out of it because they can't find a file, we haven't done our job. If we've done everything right, everything we've done to prepare for their session should be invisible to them. They can just come into an edit room and start working. That philosophy is specific to me and my cohorts at Showtime and the production environment we have tried to create. You may have a different philosophy that serves a different outcome. In any case, understanding what you're trying to achieve and help in determining workflows will help in determining workflows that ensure that benchmarks and deadlines are met. This philosophy doesn't mean, however, that they can't have some responsibilities related to getting their work started. In fact, the architecture we've created is designed to facilitate this. When we opened our in-house facility, Redpost, back in 2007, we were cutting about 3,600 plus spots, which could be promos, trailers, launch spots, etc., per year, with a 100% freelance editorial staff. These spots were ultimately versioned into about 25,000 pieces to air. We had 7 edit rooms running Final Cut 7 and 2 Pro Tool audio suites, and the whole thing was run by myself, a scheduler, and a night shift coordinator. We didn't have time to hunt for media or to do any other detective work. So we needed to create a system that empowered end users to be able to help themselves as much as possible. To achieve this, we created a formula for file names and folder structures, which limited the number of occasions where we had to help. And this freed us up to manage assets and set up sessions. Until that point, the process was something of the Wild West. For example, although projects were still being done, we weren't referring to them by their job numbers. People would call them the waterfall spot or some other name when the actual title of the spot was, Dexter Season 2 trailer or Nurse Jackie launch spot. In any case, this made everything much smoother and easier to manage. It also meant that the editors and producers could easily get what they needed as they were working, which was like a lubricant for the post-production process and allowed the creative to flourish. The next thing was to set up simple and easy to understand and follow parameters. One of the first things we did was to decide that we were going to standardize the file type and codec. We settled on a ProRes 422 29.97 frame rate. Eventually that became 23.98 because we knew that limiting certain technical parameters would increase reliability and make troubleshooting when necessary that much simpler. At the same time, we knew we needed an easy way to identify assets and that we wanted to group things by series or show type. But it couldn't just be the name of the job or the show because of character limitations on file names at the time. So we devised a naming convention that made things a little more simple. It starts with a 3-digit prefix for every series name. And then you can see here how it's followed up in a specific way. So for example, all the media and projects for Homeland Season 8 begin with HML8, the short name for Homeland being HML, and then the season number, which is the number 8. If we wanted to find something, all we had to do was sort by name in the Finder and everything would fall into place, or you could just search for that prefix. We weren't working with a MAM yet, so this was the best we had. The second element in the file name can vary depending on the type of asset. If it's an episode, it's an episode number. If it's a project, it's the job number, and so on. The point is, the naming convention is one of the few components of workflow that is non-negotiable. All the people responsible for managing these assets understand this. More importantly, however, all the creative people, editors, producers, PAs, etc., also understand this. As I said before, the entire editorial staff was and still is freelance, so it needed to be easy to learn and easy to figure out. I don't insist on a specific project architecture, but I do insist that the naming convention is adhered to. My point here is that smoothing out a workflow starts with goals and principles. Before you can hope to have a comfortable environment, you must understand how you want it to work and why it needs to work that way. It can't be arbitrary. Was this easy to implement as a new process? No. First of all, it created a great deal of work for my team because we were setting everything up ahead of time. It continues to be this way, but that's how it needs to work. To this day, I don't think the people who are using these assets understand what it takes to set up an environment that allows the creative to happen as it does at Showtime. That's okay. That's the job. Also, everybody has their own way of organizing things in their head. Creative people don't react well to what appear to be, a random set of alphanumeric, characters. So when we started to talk to the producers about series prefixes and job numbers, we did get some pushback. Editors didn't have a problem with this. They loved it. However, after a short while, where we had to remind people that this was our responsibility and that it would, in the long run, make their lives easier, it became the way we worked. Sometimes you gotta make the horse drink the water. I was convinced that we'd done the right thing when an editor came back after 6 months to update an omnibus spot. Now, an omnibus spot is a spot that shows everything that Showtime has and does, and it gets updated regularly. I went into his edit room to see how he was making out, and he said, I have to tell you, I was sure 100% that I was going to spend the first 2 hours of my morning finding the old project and relinking to the media. Instead, I was working in 20 minutes. There was another instance when the creative director in charge of Dexter called me as we were preparing to start creative for the last season. And she said that she was going to need all the projects from the first season. She said that she understood that that was 8 years ago, and she wasn't going to need them for at least a week. I called her back in 15 minutes. I told her we had everything. She could start anytime she wanted to. It doesn't just work for them. It works for us as well. Simplicity and consistency, very important. About 5 years ago, we started using a MAM to manage and distribute assets to the company. It started as just a way to streamline things for the editors, but it quickly became apparent that there were many others in the company, virtually everyone, who needed access to these assets for one reason or another. And so we had to make everything available to everyone. This is where the idea of keeping the end user in mind comes into play. I will confess that when I started to design how Reach Engine was going to work, I had an inaccurate concept of how producers and editors worked. It was really more about how I imagined I would work if I were them, a classic engineer's mistake. In an attempt to make things simpler, I actually made it more complicated by trying to thread the needle with metadata, when in fact, all that was needed was the basic information that was commonly known to most of the users. For example, I knew from the beginning that the file naming conventions we had already put in place would need to stay. Producers and other non-creative people who searched for media were already familiar with this, but I didn't take into account the many people who were going to be using the tool who were not in the creative loop and who just needed to find whatever it was that they needed so that they could screen it. In 2019, I created a survey for all the MAM users and asked them how and if they liked it, how they were using it, etc. I was surprised by what I heard, but I did hear them. They had many comments, some good, some not so good, but a common thread was that the file names were confusing. As I saw these comments, a number of times it dawned on me that I hadn't thought about all the end users and what their experiences were with our media, although I thought that I had. Since then, we've pared down the metadata with an emphasis on consistency of result, and this has been a much more successful endeavor. And having done this made the MAM a very important tool in our toolbox when we came home in 2020. The last thing about setting up a MAM is that most people, whether they know it or not, use something like a MAM all the time. Anyone who's ever searched for music on Spotify or tried to find something on Amazon knows how to search using keywords. Again, the challenge was convincing the creative staff to use it because they had gotten accustomed to Finder searches and, why do something new? I gave every user a one-on-one tutoring session to get them started. And once they saw the potential of what this incredibly powerful tool could do, they became less skeptical and more interested in using it. Everything I've spoken about so far is related to media that we receive, which is already completed. We get episodes of series, documentaries, and so on that we can turn them into promos. But what about when we send out our team for shoots? How are we communicating to those people on the set whose job is to acquire assets for use in the edit room? Although they're working with the producer to get something specific, the post-production parameters still apply, and knowing what those are and why they are in place makes it very easy to convey to a DP. It also allows us to be prepared when we know we're not getting assets that are in our preferred file type and properly named. Living in a file-based world means that there are a great many ways in which media will be configured when it comes to us. HD or 4K, log or rec 709, frame rate, goes on and on. But knowing that we're going to present the editor with a ProRes 422, 1080p, 2398 media makes it much easier for us to set up the tools we'll need to turn those raw files into that. As I said before, I don't want to get in the way of the creative, but sometimes that means putting the quality of the edit first, with the understanding that the original raw assets will be available when it's time to finish. Get the story told first, and then put it in a nice shiny cover. Now, everything I've discussed so far is really related to my team and others that get all this work done. Keep in mind that there's my team and then there's the team, which occupies a much wider circle. Our operations department support people, for example, are excellent at hearing what we're trying to accomplish and helping conceive of how it can be implemented. Although I work for the creative services, the ops people are a crucial and valued part of the team. None of my people make Vantage workflows, for example, but our support people do. And without that kind of help, the best naming convention in the world isn't very useful. So don't be afraid to share knowledge with people and get as much as you can from those who know something you don't. This only brings your collective experiences closer together and clears the way forward. In order to have a successful workflow, it's crucial that you have buy-in from the creative staff that's using it. And most importantly, that they trust you to get it right. This can be the most difficult thing to achieve, because if you have a creative staff of 50 people, you will get 50 opinions about how to do any given thing. I remember when we were building Red Post, I was trying to determine the right color for the sound panels that were going to be on the walls in the edit rooms. And since the producers were going to be spending the most time there, I thought I would see what they thought. So they'd be happy about it. I started to ask them and I got all sorts of answers. Some said the whole room should be black. Others wanted different colors for each room. It went on, and none of it was helpful until I spoke to Earl Fash, who was the VP in charge of sports creative. Earl was someone I've known for many years and was one of the great guys. He passed away a couple of years ago, but I'll always remember this lesson. He said, frankly, you can't please everybody, so make a decision and go with it. At the time, I was terrified, but I knew he was right. In the end, we went with a neutral color that was appropriate for an editing suite. Some people complained, but those people generally complained about everything anyway. The others just appreciated having a comfortable place to edit. Since then, everything we've put in place did, in fact, improve the flow of work through the process. And I can say that in general, I believe my judgment is trusted by the people who have to use the facility to get the work done. The point is, to ensure a smooth post-production workflow, you have to know why you're designing it, what the necessary workflows will be, and what impact this will have on the people who will be living it. All of this is couched in the understanding that you probably don't know everything and may need to fill those gaps in before writing anything in stone. Then you have to stick your neck out and make it happen. So, just to encapsulate everything, to ensure a smooth post-production process, you need to understand what you want your end result to be. In my case, I wanted the creative staff to be able to be creative without unnecessary and avoidable interruptions. You have to know who your end users are. I knew the creative staff and how they worked, but this doesn't apply to just post-production. If you're a plumbing supply company that services mostly lay people, don't overcomplicate your online catalog with industry jargon that the average guy won't understand. Keep it simple. Set up a system with the fewest possible parameters. Be consistent. Set up your system and don't waver from it without a specific and unavoidable reason. These will be few and far between once you have established your process and everything is on board. Front load the process. I had a boss in one of my first jobs who told me that he liked to back into the driveway because you aren't always in a hurry to get home, but you might be in a hurry to leave. And what he meant by that was, if you set things up the right way at the beginning, the rest of it will take care of itself. This often requires a lot of work, but it'll be work that's done on your terms and not the last minute headless chicken that happens otherwise. Thanks for listening.
Oh, that's a fantastic story, and has stimulated quite a few questions, some juicy questions from the room.
Great, bring them on.
Well, I think first, let's start off with change management. So you've talked quite a bit about bringing, let's say, structure and order and discipline. But you also spoke about being surrounded by, creative people, and that's not necessarily a world that embraces structure and order and discipline. So, what are your best, your tips, your best practices for change management? How do you get people to change? Do you impose new rules on the creative staff? Do you end up just begging and pleading? How do you encourage? How do you approach that?
Well, the first thing you need to do is, as I said, you have to know what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. You need to be able to articulate why it's important that you change what you're doing. Look, I was a music major in college. I have a creative background, so I understand really how the creative mind works, and it doesn't want to be in a rigid box. But when we're talking about post-production, you're talking about these people needing to be able to have what they need at their fingertips. And that cannot happen without some rigid organization, like the example I said before, like if you're trying to write an essay and then you're in the zone and you got to get up and go sharpen your pencil. When you come back, you're lost, right? So we've all had that experience. So the point is, the first thing you need to do is know what you want to do, be able to articulate it, and then your management needs to talk to their management and make sure that they understand. Yeah, you are going to have to force some of them, but what'll happen is you can show them that you know what you're talking about and that it does help you in the long run. What helped me the most was that the editors, when they came to Red Post, they walked into an environment that was, first of all, clean, organized. They walked into an edit room that was well outfitted. And they saw that, the media was organized and easy to understand. Believe it or not, that's not that common, apparently. So the producers who were working with the editors were listening to the editors say, this place is running. This is a good place and you should listen to them. And once we cracked through the ice there, it became much easier to say, hey, you know what, we should work this way. I hope that's a long answer. I hope it answers the question.
Right, that makes sense, and it is a complicated question, right? There is no one simple answer. Yeah, that's good.
But like I said, sometimes you got to make the horse drink the water.
It's a good analogy. I think the surprise sub-theme of the day is going to turn out to be file naming conventions. Jeremy gave a nice shout out to the heroes of file naming conventions this morning. How did you design yours? How did you approach that? And why only 3 characters in the short names for the series?
Yeah, that's a good question. I used to get that question a lot. When we first started, so like I said, before Red Post was opened in 2007, it was kind of the Wild West. We had edit rooms in offices on a different floor. We had a bunch of stuff that were just in servers. We needed to organize it. The problem was there was a file naming character limitation for Avid. So I needed to make these file names as short as possible. So I knew the first thing I wanted to do was organize by series name, but I couldn't use the whole series name, So I decided on a 3-character limit plus a season number. And that worked fine, it served us very well. That's why.
Have you had a season number that reached 10?
Yeah, actually, Shameless, the last season of Shameless was 11, and we've had 1 or 2 series where it made sense to have a 4-digit prefix, but when you have a set of rules that are rigid, then if you have to vary from them, then those few occasions are easier to remember, frankly. And you vary from that for a specific reason, and everything else stays the way it is.
Now, do you end up applying that file naming convention just to the final files, or is it applied throughout the entire life cycle of
everything we get? Everything we get. We do a lot of work with dailies, for example. We start to promote our shows way out in advance of premiere, and so we're getting dailies all the time, and every one of those is renamed with the series prefix.
Okay.
It's just, if I want to find something, I can type, HTML8, and I find everything.
And here's somebody in the audience asking or saying, we work with multiple agencies producing hundreds of assets, and they all have their own internal conventions. How do you suggest to deal with that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Working at Showtime, being a single entity, we can dictate certain things. I think it's okay to say we have to work a certain way. I think other ways, I don't know what your workflow is and how you're getting things from them and passing things back and forth. I know that the agencies we work with have to deal with our naming conventions. And so maybe the best way to do that is to just make sure that the different entities that have different file naming conventions are compartmentalized appropriately in your storage. You can only control the things that you can control. So, make those rules as rigid as possible, and make sure that if you're going to ABC company, you look in the ABC company folder, all that stuff is set up properly, and that the people that are working on that understand how those things work. But it can be tricky, I understand.
There's loads of great questions here. We actually only have time for maybe one more.
Okay.
File sizes are getting bigger and bigger. What tools would you recommend we look at to solve for this? We have a damn, not a ma'am, given we produce all sorts of, all tactics, not just video. Yeah,
well, that's tough. First of all, I'm going to say that the cloud has been tremendously helpful for us. We also have, a very large central server. It's 1.5 petabytes that we store stuff. I would recommend that you look into Vantage to help you create smaller file sizes. Also, look, we use Media Encoder all the time as part of our process. We bring stuff in, we run it through the processes it needs to go through, and we put those files where they need to go. But ultimately, you're going to have to increase your storage. You're just going to have to if you're getting tons of stuff. The other thing that you do is, make sure that you archive whatever process you have to archive. We were archiving to LTO tape for a long time, and we're going to start putting things in Glacier. But archive the stuff that you don't need, that you're not going to need tomorrow. I mean, that may be obvious, but there's no easy answer to that one. It's usually throw money at it is usually the
yes. Isn't that the truth? You have most definitely touched or tickled a lively nerve of interest among our audience, and there's a whole pile of questions here that we just don't have time to get to. But very, very interesting topic. Clearly a topic close to home for our audience. Thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us today.